Awesome. Hey, Heather. Yeah, cool. I'm so glad you're here with me. I'm so honored.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just introduce you a bit. You're an activist. This is what I know about you. You're an activist, like a women's rights campaigner focusing mostly on federal inmates, and women's prisons in Canada. Um, yeah, and you're the founder of CAWSBAR, am I right?
One of the founding members. Yeah.
Right, Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Yeah, I've been following the work that you've been doing for some time. And yeah, again, I'm just really thankful for you and all the advocacy you're doing around this issue. It's super, super important as we all know. Um, or as some of us know. I don't know. Um, yeah, and I think I first stumbled across your work when I read your 2019 article that was published. And I want to talk about like what got you into this, but I also wanted to like we can start however you want to start if you want to go into like how you sort of ended up in this line of work, but I also wanted to ask you about that article and how it was responded to. Like what was the response that you got from that?
Okay. So I actually knew of nothing that was going on. I was addicted to drugs, in and out of jail, and then I ended up receiving a federal sentence of 3 years. And I was incarcerated at Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener, Ontario. And I, because I was doing drugs, I wasn't really aware of any politics or anything that was going on with the world because my whole life was just consumed with getting, finding, using. I was like in my own little bubble. So like I saw a few things like when I was in prison, I am jazz, but I didn't understand what it was. I thought it was like a one-off type thing. I remember reading magazines in the library about all these gender identity things, but still like I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't realize that it was something to be of concern. Um, but when I first came across men identifying as women, I was actually in provincial jail.
Mhm.
So Ontario passed gender identity or expression into their Ontario Human Rights Code back in 2012, but the jails didn't actually do anything with that until 2015. And I was in Windsor Detention, provincial jail. They house men on one side and women on the other side. And I had the laundry job doing the men's laundry. So Monday to Friday, like 8 to 1, I would go off range to the laundry department and I would wash and dry and roll all the men's rolls because the men get their clothes given to them like 3 times a week. Whereas the women, we keep our clothes and we actually have washers and dryers on our units so that we are assigned like 2 uniforms and it's up to us to make sure they're clean, um, because women get their period and they don't want the men handling our underwear and stuff like that, which makes total sense, right? So I would leave range and I was on the direct supervision. So Windsor jail's a lot different than most jails. They call it a super jail. So they actually have a couple different ranges for women. The biggest one is direct supervision, which means that the guards are actually on range with you 24/7. And then they have indirect supervision, which is across the hall. And that is what most jails are like. The guards are not on range with you. They come every like half an hour to do a walkthrough. You're locked down majority of the time. There are a lot of things that you don't have access to because you're unsupervised. And usually with Windsor Jail, if you're in direct supervision, it's because you can't behave on on a range with other people. So I was noticing when I was going out for laundry that there were men across the hall in the women's indirect. And I'm someone that asks a lot of questions. I'm always like wanting to understand things or know what's going on. And I used to talk to the guards about it, and they told me it was the men there had sexual assault type charges. So either like pedophiles or
Mhm.
rapists, like some sort of sex charge. And the guards said, oh, they're saying they're women, so that they're taken off the compound with the men for safety. So I was like, oh, okay, like these men are just saying they're women so that they're protected, because if you have sexual assault charges, especially against children, you're unsafe with the men. That has been and probably will always be. Men do not like pedophiles, right? So you are at risk. So, anyways, I didn't think much of it. And I remember the one time, so we were being raided. I call it raided, they call it searched. So what they do is like a whole group of guards will come in and they put you in a, like everyone that is on that range, they like herd us into an area, usually like A&D, or so Windsor had a basketball court and they would put us all in the basketball court, and then they would go through our cells and they would like rip everything apart, throw our photos on the floor, and like just trash ourselves, right? So this was like March 2015, and one of the girls threw a banana peel at another girl, and it hit her, and she thought it was me that did it, and it wasn't. And she grabbed me by the back of the hair, and we started fighting. And then the guards came and handcuffed us both and brought her to like A&D, I believe, and brought me across the hall to indirect. And when I was there, this guy named Chris Webster from London, Ontario, he was there and he was in on a bunch of sex charges. And he was in the cell beside me. And they were making me strip in the cell to check to make sure that I didn't have any contraband. And they pulled him out of the cell to move him to a different part. And he peeked into my cell while I was like undressing. And the guard had to yank him away. And it was like, I felt so violated because like I had my shirt off and this pedophile, like sex offender, was looking at me. Um, that was like my first experience with it all in provincial. And then I got transferred to prison
Sorry,
in
Heather,
December.
can I interrupt you for a second? Okay,
Yeah,
just to clarify, this person, this Chris guy was in the same sort of block cell structure that you were in because he identified as female?
yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So so actually to go back a bit, so I told you how I would talk to the guards every morning when they bring me to laundry or bring me back. Um, because you kind of develop relationships with guards, which is very different than normal jail because they're on range with you for up to 60 hours a week. They see you more than they see their family. So some guards are there because they care and they really get to understand you. They bring you to your visits. They read your letters. So they know a lot about you. And I had a lot of guards there that actually cared. So like I would have like real conversations with them. And there was one guard that I really, really liked, a woman. She really cared about us, would play like euchre with us. Like we would do like green against blue because the women were in green uniforms and then blue is obviously the guards, right? Um, and she used to say that she hated strip searching him because he would get an erection. Um, and then they were trying to request that the male guards strip search him because they were extremely uncomfortable and like obviously, right? Um, so I knew that he was there, like I knew that he hadn't had surgery, like he wasn't on hormones, that he was just there to like get off, be near the women, because he used to like gawk at us all the time when we would be like taking A&D. He'd be in the window staring at us. So I knew all of that because of the guards. And then but they were kept separate, right? So I was like, whatever, who cares? They're not like in with us. And then I got transferred to prison in December 2017. And little did I know that Bill C-16 was passed. So now transfers are going to be based on gender identity or expression because the Canadian Human Rights Act added that, right? So I get to Grand Valley and when in Kitchener, and the first thing the women say to me is like, "Oh, watch out for Judy. Judy is a pervert, but you're not allowed to acknowledge that Judy is a man. You have to use she/her pronouns." So I was warned right away, and I thought it was like so weird because I'm like, why are men living with us, right? With prison, it's different. So I was on medium security compound, even though I was a minimum security prisoner. Um, I elected to stay on medium because there were more programs available. There were more options for me to do. I wasn't planning on going on a work release, so there was no point in me going up the hill to minimum. So I was on medium compound. They're like cottage style houses. So they have 9 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a living room, a laundry room. There are no cameras in the houses. The guards come through once every 2 hours to do their rounds. So we lived in these houses with these men. Um, Judy was a pervert. Like he didn't have charges like sexual nature charges. His were like violent crimes. He'd done like 40 years in the men's prison, got out, had surgery, and then got revoked and sent back in and came to the women's prison. He used to always say, like, I'm a woman from the waist down, but I'm a man from the waist up. I will always think like a man. He was very like aggressive. He used to always make comments like about our body parts, ask if he could eat Doritos off of our ass, a lot of like sexual harassment type stuff. He shoved his tongue down my friend's throat, was always getting in trouble with the guards, exposing himself. And the thing that they do in prison is they have this thing called the SLE, which is the structured living environment. So women who are developmentally delayed or who have serious mental health issues are put in this structured living environment where they have more support. And anytime one of the men who identified as a woman got in trouble, that's where they would put them. So they would put them in with the most vulnerable women that we had in the prison. And it gave them access to these women who couldn't protect themselves. So I realized, you know, I they don't tell you about these policies or that these men can transfer in. I was actually watching the news and that's how I found out about it. And then I was only there for I ended up getting parole in July 2018, but I didn't get released until October 2018. So fortunately for me, I was only at Grand Valley for just under a year because I did a majority of my time in provincial.
Mhm.
So I got out and I went to the Toronto Halfway House, the Elizabeth Fry Society. And that's where I encountered Chris, who had not had surgery, but he was on hormones. And it was like walking on eggshells with him. He was so unpredictable, would fly off the handle, very emotionally unstable. He used to get in trouble all the time for the things that he was wearing because they were completely inappropriate. So I had to live with him in the halfway house. And by that point, I still didn't really understand what was going on. And ironically enough, I don't know if you know April Halley from Newfoundland, but so strange story, but so I was in and out of jail, and I had met some women, and they had ended up going off to GBI before me. and I got out, and they would send me mail and send me pictures. And one of my friends, she was my cellmate in provincial, she went off to GBI and she sent me a photo of her at GBI. And I posted it on Facebook to share with the other women who were out that were friends with us. And I tagged Grand Valley. So apparently it showed on their page on Facebook, this photo with my name tagged. So that's how April found me. And she messaged me and was like, hey, like, there's Bill C-16. They're changing the prison policy. Like, you can transfer based on gender identity or expression. Like, I know you were in prison. Do you want to talk about this? I'm interested in this man named Christopher. And I like read this message and I was like, whoa, like this woman is crazy. I'm not getting involved in this. And ironically enough, the man that she wanted to have information about, I was living with in the halfway house. So this was like January 2019 when she sent the message. And then, so Elizabeth Fry is under CAWSBAR membership. So CAWSBAR is the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. And I look at it as like CAWSBAR is the umbrella and E-Fry is like the spokes that come out. So CAFES has a national conference every year. And I actually like wrote in because they have this thing where like you write a story and then they pick like 10 women who they sponsor to go to the national conference. They'll pay for their travel and accommodation. So I wrote them my story and I ended up winning like the scholarship. And the national conference was in June 2019 in Ottawa. Ironically enough, the name of the conference was No Woman Left Behind. So I went, and it was at this time that CASE was passing their inclusion policy, which meant that trans women are women and we're going to support them the exact same as women. And I was there, and a woman that I was in with, she was actually groomed and sexually harassed by a prolific pedophile named Matthew Harks. And she got up and told all the CAFES and E-Fry employees about her experience and how she had an extensive history of childhood sexual assault and trauma, and that it sent her into like PTSD, and it sent her backwards in her trauma recovery, right? And the women all said, you don't need a vagina to be a woman, and I'm concerned about the transphobia in this room. She left that stage crying, like completely upset. They dismissed her. They weren't taking her seriously. She felt like she had no support. And CAFES is the only national organization in Canada that deals with federally sentenced women specifically. Um, and I just couldn't believe that happened. And as I was at that conference that weekend, I realized that it was very divided. It was like one side against the other. There was a lot of yelling, fighting, crying. Um, it was like a very surreal experience. And I realized that there was nobody supporting us, you know? I ended up being on the side like because there were some women that didn't support this that work for Caves and E-Fry, but they weren't willing to speak up about it and risk their professional careers. Um, they're the ones that taught me everything about the policy, and told me what was happening, and gave me all the information to build the foundation of my advocacy against this. Um, I I guess I didn't realize what I was getting into when I decided that I was going to advocate for these women. Um, I because I'd never been in politics. I'd never been in anything. Like my world was just drugs, right? So after that conference, that's when I decided like I am going to be the voice to these women. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to let people know what's going on. And when I got back from that conference, I actually messaged April back and was like, what do you want to know? Like, I'm in the halfway house with this guy. And that's what led me into the gender critical movement was actually her. Um, And like from that point forward, so that was June 2019, I was just yelling about what was happening from like the rooftop, being like, listen, listen. Um, but that is what got me into my advocacy about this specific issue. Prior to that, like I used to speak on panels for EFRI about like strip searching and segregation and all these other issues that happen to women in prison and jail. But after I started speaking out about the policy, EFRI no longer invited me to speak on panels for them. So, because of my advocacy about the policy of transferring men into women's prisons, it put an axe in being able to advocate for other organizations about other things that are important to me, like strip searching. Like because I did the laundry job in provincial, I was actually strip searched 5 days a week, twice a day, sometimes up to 4 times a day. So I experienced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of strip searches. And because of my advocacy on this issue, they were no longer willing to have me speak on their behalf.
Wow. Yeah, that wow, you've been through so much. And yeah, you were really, fighting for, stopping the dehumanization of women and on so many levels in the penitentiary system. And like, yeah, it's wild. It's wild that this has all happened. I don't even know where to begin. So I guess, yeah, I guess going back to the responses to you, like other than, of course, not being able to be sort of highlighted or spotlighted or have a voice or platformed in any way, um, when you started to speak out, what kind of responses did you get? I mean, not only like professionally or on the level of like advocacy in terms of women's groups, but how did you how was the community response? How was like, yeah, I guess just generally.
So
Wait,
the
sorry,
gender credit.
like when you say you didn't know, I remember you saying like I didn't really know what I was getting into. Like I guess I'm wondering kind of down that aisle.
Yeah, so I had no idea about trans activists. I had no idea how brainwashed people were. I didn't realize that it was going to like jeopardize job opportunities or volunteer work, or that I was going to endure threats of violence and assault. So I never really took any of that into consideration. I just was like, I know that this is not right, and I'm going to speak about it.
Mhm.
And I did so publicly with my, legal name and my face, which kind of put a target on me.
Yeah.
And those are things that I didn't consider at the time. I don't think that it would have changed my mind on speaking out, even if I did know the repercussions or the risks. I think I'm extremely stubborn, so I would have done it anyways. And I'm also like impulsive because I'm ADHD and you tend to be extremely impulsive. Um, so I don't think that knowing would have changed my course of action. I think it probably could have prepared me more,
Mhm.
especially with like, so EFRI case, like they called me transphobic. They would no longer support me. Um, they requested that I come in for re-education training. Um, it was very interesting. I remember like going to Tim Hortons to meet up with one of the employees and it was crazy. It was like you either stop talking about this, you back down, or you're not gonna, like
Can you even imagine like re-education training? Like it's really honestly like it's so like authoritarian and crazy and like I you said brainwashing, like it's a It's like the term re-education training just like to me means brainwashing. Like we're gonna indoctrinate you now. Like we're gonna indoctrinate you more because you're not indoctrinated enough. You're not speaking right speak. You're not thinking right thoughts. So we're going to change the way you think if you'd only just come with us, right? Like this is just crazy.
Yeah, so that same year, I want to say maybe like September 29th, 2019, Megan Murphy actually came to Toronto and spoke at the public library.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like I hadn't met anybody in person in the gender critical movement. Like I knew a few people like online. Um, Megan, of course, had found me. And I wasn't expecting this, but at her talk, she actually mentioned me by name. Um, and it was after that that some women reached out to me and asked me to um like help found CAWSBAR.
Nice.
And that event actually just like blew my mind because like I'm like just freshly out of the halfway house, I'm on parole. And I show up at this event by myself and there's like 500 TRAs like screaming and like just being like completely insane and like psycho, like, and there's like so many cops. And I have PTSD from cops because I have like really bad experiences with arrests. Like my run arrest actually, like 9 years ago, a few days ago, I was actually driving my car and they surrounded me in like normal cars, plain clothes. Like I didn't realize they were police and they smashed out my front car windows and dragged me out of the window by my hair. And my car was not in park. So it like went forward and hit the cop's car. And they were like kicking me and hitting me. And then they like picked me up and they were smashing my head off the hood of the car. Now I know it's a police car, right? And then they ended up fracturing my arm. And then when they brought me to the police station, they had three males and one female officer in the bathroom with me, and they actually kneed me so hard in the stomach I urinated myself. And then they strip searched me, and one cop had my fractured arm behind my back and a knee in my back and was holding me down. And then the female officer actually stuck her hand inside me to check for drugs, but they had already had my drugs. Like there was no drugs in me. Um, so I was like violated and a lot of trauma. Like I had a cast on my arm. And when I went to jail, they put me in segregation. And like after 6 days, I was like, I can't handle being in here. Like I'm withdrawing. I'm in isolation. Like I ripped my cast off and like threw it at the guard. And I'm like, let me out, please. Like I just want a hot shower. I want to be able to move. Like, so yeah, I have PTSD from the police. And this event was just crawling with police. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm supposed to trust that the police are going to protect me now when they've never protected me before. So I had high anxiety being at that event. And actually, I don't know if you know Benji, um, but Benji actually reached out to me on Facebook and was like, hey, are you going to the Megan Murphy event? Like, I'll look for you, like, so that you're not alone. And like, she found me in the crowd, which was cool. So like, I actually had people to like be with. But I remember standing on the sidelines outside and I'm just like minding my own business all by myself. And next thing I know, I have a mic shoved into my face and it's David Menzies from Rebel News. So he actually did my first ever interview and I was like so nervous and I was just like, I was trying to stay like neutral and like, because I just didn't want an audience or people to be like on me, right? So that event was a big wake up call. And Efra knew I was going to it. So one of their staff ended up meeting me at like Tim Hortons like a couple days later to tell me how wrong I was. And they actually released like a press statement against Megan Murphy and the event and like just like putting her down. And I was just like, wow, like this is crazy.
Yeah, that's wow, that's really intense. there's so much about this issue that like that trickles down and affects like all these different like you've brought up so much of it, but like um what about like I know you've experienced like um you're also telling other women's stories who contact you from prison and are telling you about like what's going on and what's been going on. I've read some like pretty and listened to some pretty horrific stories that women have shared with you. And it just seems like this issue is like increasing in intensity and yeah, it's just like getting more and more, like more and more. And I think like you even said in your article, that your article, I'm just going to say it's called The Alarm Has Been Sounded, Who's Going to Respond? And you wrote that in 2019, I believe. And anyone can look for that. It's a great article. But it you mentioned in that article that there had been rumors, and obviously, I mean, I feel like this is like an intuitive thing right away, but that lots of men, now that this is a thing that you can do, will just like identify as women to get a more lenient sentence and to be in a place like men's and women's prisons. Not a lot of people know this, but they're different. They're very different. Like even when you were describing the laundry issue, like there's just different things that um there's different rights that women have or different privileges, I guess, that women have in prison than men. I mean, obviously, there's lots of violations that happen that maybe don't happen as much to men as well, but it does tend to be a more like hospitable environment, especially because sometimes I know there's infants that are in prison um, as well with their mothers. But it sounds like this is just getting worse and worse, and there are men that are identifying more and more as women when they're leading up to sentencing in order to get more lenient sentences. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, we saw it firsthand with a guy named Steve Mellenbacher. So he did like 2 decades in the men's prison. He did like 16 bank heists. Um, and he was like unlawfully at large, gets revoked, like just can't manage to stay out of trouble, off drugs, in and out. I want to say like 2018 when he was out on stat release, he ended up being revoked and he went back as a woman. He did not have surgery. He was in like Fraser Valley in BC, Edmonton for women in obviously Edmonton, and then also transferred to Grand Valley. So the thing with him and why he was being transferred so much is because once a man identifies as a woman and is transferred to a woman's prison, CSC doesn't involuntarily transfer them back to the men's prison. The only way they're going back to the men's prison is if they put in a request to go back. So instead, they'll involuntarily transfer them from women's prison to women's prison, which leaves victims and issues all across the country. Steve openly admitted like several times that he was not a woman. And if you see him on the street, don't call him a woman, that he was only in there to be near the women. So, ironically enough, Steve actually has ties and history to Sarnia. Sarnia is where I was born and raised. It's where I am now. I was in Toronto for like 4 years. I just moved back to Sarnia last year. And this is ironic, but so I got a job here in Sarnia, and one of the one of the cooks in the kitchen, like he didn't live far from me and we were on a split shift. So he's like, yeah, I'll pick you up on my way by and bring you to work. Like it was before I had a vehicle because in Toronto I just didn't have a need for one. And he's driving me back to work and he's like, I still can't believe you were in prison. Like that's so crazy. And then he's like, actually, you might have heard of my stepfather. He's a famous bank robber. And I'm like, Stephen Melbacher? He's like, yeah, how'd you know? I'm like, get the F out of here. I'm like, that's your stepfather? I'm like, I'm the one that blew the whistle on him. I'm like, he was identifying as a woman and in women's prisons. He's like, yeah, he's not a woman. That is all fake. Like, and it blew my mind. Like I literally work with this guy. Um,
Right.
so I've been in contact with Steve. like I've spoken to Steve.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and it was all just him pretending he was a woman to get close to women.
Mhm.
He clearly has mental health issues. And in his parole document that I got, it states that he was charged with criminal harassment and sexual assault. The sexual assault actually got dropped and he was only charged with criminal harassment, but that's because he took a plea deal with the prosecution. Um, and that happens a lot. Like
Mhm.
we always see people take plea deals because it's the way that the courts can get a conviction
Mhm.
without going through trial or losing at trial. Um, so that is what he did, and it took a very long time to even get to that point.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he ended up sexually assaulting quite a few women inside. Only one of them actually formally charged him, but there are so many women that have spoken out about him.
Mhm.
He would like corner them in the laundry room or make comments about their body or go into their room and steal photos of them in their bathing suits and share it around compound. Um, he was basically untouchable, is what the women would say, because he would just put in um, like human rights complaints saying they're discriminating against his gender identity. Um,
Because they would call him a man.
well, or because he was put in segregation because he's HIV positive, didn't disclose that, and then slept with women on compound. And then they had to do blood tests to make sure that he wasn't giving HIV to other people. So when he was in segregation, they wouldn't give him makeup.
Right. That's a human
Yeah,
rights issue. Right. Okay.
yeah, yeah, because we get makeup in
Mhm.
segregation.
Right. It's interesting because I've come across people, it's not interesting, it's really sad and shitty because I've come across people who I've brought this issue up with and they have literally responded to me like, but does that actually happen? Like, does that really happen? And it's like it's happening so much, and the fact that we're not hearing about it on the media, like I know there's one media source, and I think like Redux is really the only media source that I know of that's like committed to actually like telling these stories um about, and it's like a lot of the stories are about men who have sexual crimes, violent sexual crimes, violent crimes slash sexual crimes, any of the above, and who are now identifying as women and being placed with women. And surprise, surprise, I mean, it's not a surprise that this is happening at all. This is like we could see this coming a mile away. And it seems like the media and the government are just completely like silent about this. And it's yeah, and you're right. It's like there's a huge stigma, and um you get a label and there's a target on your back when you start to try to open the conversation about this, right? um
Yeah.
yeah, it's like this is I mean there's still people out there, lots, like most, I think most, I don't know most, but there are people out there who don't even think this is happening. And so yeah, that's, I guess that's why I find your work so important.
Well, it's hard to believe for people because they have such a trust in the government. They don't believe that the government could do something so cruel or heinous, right? They need to believe that their government is good and going to protect them and do the right thing. Because if they don't have that thought or that security blanket for them, then what do they have? But the government is doing it.
Mhm.
And it's a direct result of the government. What a lot of people don't know is that the policy prior to 2017 was that it was very rare that there was a man transferred into a woman's prison that hadn't had surgery. Very rare, like probably one.
Mhm.
Um, but the policy was that you needed to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, that you had to be living as a woman, you had to have surgery, you had to be on hormones, and it still was, they
Seems
decided.
seems like at the base, like the very least that someone like that we should be requesting, right? For
Yeah.
yeah,
So the policy stated that you, in order to qualify for surgery while being under the care of CSC, which is Correctional Service of Canada, you had to be living outside of prison for 1 year before you qualified. So living outside for 1 year as a woman before you qualified for the surgery. So this would be like on day parole, full parole, statutory release, right? And then in 2017, they actually did change their policy. So they made it that you could be living in prison for 1 year as a woman and you would qualify for surgery. They released that policy. And then there was a town hall meeting in Kingston, Ontario, where Justin Trudeau was. And a man who identified as a woman got up and was like, well, what about trans women in prison? And Justin Trudeau was like, oh, I never considered that. But don't worry, we'll take care of it. So I actually, my friend and I, we submitted for an access to information request, wanting the commissioner's briefing notes. And it does state in those notes that about Justin Trudeau and the meeting in Kingston and how he is pushing for the policy to be changed. So CSC revoked that policy that they put out and they put out a new one, which made the transfers now based on gender identity or expression instead of sex. And you can actually find all of that in CBC articles as well, because they actually reported on that. So Correctional Service of Canada was not willing to transfer based on gender identity or expression until Justin Trudeau single-handedly stepped in himself and made that policy happen. So this is a direct result of the government's meddling.
making it law.
Yeah,
Also known as like, elsewhere, maybe in the UK and the United States too, as like self-ID laws, right?
yeah.
And here too. I guess like lots of people, and you've already brought this up, like you said, lots of the time, like certain offenders are not safe in certain facilities. And I guess people will make the argument that trans-identified people aren't safe, trans-identified men aren't safe in men's prison. Like in your estimation or what do you think is there an alternative, or should they just be housed with men?
So people use the statistics from the US actually.
Mhm.
Even in, if you go back and look at how our policies were made, they always cite US stats, which I think is ridiculous because a total of 40,000 people are incarcerated in Canada. Which is men, women, provincial, federal, right? And in the US, it's something like 2.7 million. So and the US, like you have privatized jails.
Mhm.
They don't operate the same way that we operate in Canada. So to go and use their statistics to make policies in Canada just like blows my mind because they're not even comparable.
Right.
So in Canada, the we our jails, like, yeah, they're bad. Okay. They are overcrowded, but they're not like the US. Um, we've always had these men who identified as women in the men's prisons, and actually some of the jails have their own trans wings.
Right.
So they're not even in general population with the men, they're on their own wing, and that's still not good enough for them. They want to be in women's prisons with women and children. Um, there's an easy solution to this. People say build them a jail. I don't say build them a jail, because if you build more jails, then you need to find people to fill them, right? Um, we don't need to find people to fill jails. But there is availability in some of the men's prisons and jails that like people, no matter how they identify or express themselves, could have their own like pod range, wing, and they would have access to all the amenities at that prison, but also are kept separate from the men.
Mhm.
And you can tailor those environments to their unique needs
Mhm.
because they have different needs than women. They have different needs than most of the population, right? They
Yeah.
have a lot of mental health needs. Um, and there is an easy solution to be able to protect everybody and also provide the needs for everybody. But this isn't about security, because if this was about safety and security, they would do the wings or they would do it a different way. This is about validation. That's why they need in the women's prisons. They need to be validated as their gender identity or expression at the expense of women.
Mhm.
It's all about validation,
Mhm.
not safety and security. And
Women,
they'd like you to think it is.
women and children, and that's
Yeah.
a big issue, right? Is that there are in some of these prisons there are children, babies, and like, and and some people who have been convicted for child sex assault and torture, and I think that that's just, yeah, again, it's mind blowing, it's insane. I also wanted to touch on one of the points you made in your article too, which is what I've been talking about for some time too, is that like how the statistics get, you talk about a lapse in ethics with regards to um encounters with law enforcement, but also like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but I'm thinking about, what about guards who identify as women? Like, is that happening at all? Like, that seems like something that could also be a concern. I mean, obviously, with regards to like the strip search issue is a huge issue. The close contact issue is a huge issue. Um, yeah, I don't know if you've encountered anything like that or what you think about that.
I haven't encountered any guards that identify as the opposite sex, but there are.
Yeah.
And of course, it's the same thing. They're going to be able to strip search you if they identify as that sex.
Mhm.
So yes, that is a concern.
Yeah.
Um, I find too something else that a lot of people don't talk about is the impact of these policies on guards as well, especially women,
Mhm.
because
Right.
their hands being forced. They don't want to strip search these men. They don't want to have to supervise them.
Yeah.
Like I was reading an actual case. It was in Ontario. It was a guard who was forced. She has extensive trauma as well. She was forced to supervise a male who identified as a woman who had not had surgery, and she had to watch him masturbate and all sorts of stuff. She ended up having to take like sick leave, and she made a claim. The judge kind of ruled in her favor. But there's also, I've heard stories of female guards who, like on the East Coast, that were actually beat up by these men who identify as women. They're so stressed out that they're still on leave. Um, so there are a lot of female guards who are fearful,
Yeah.
on sick leave,
Mhm.
who are being physically assaulted, who
Mhm.
are forced to watch their sexual deviancies, like so
Yeah.
they definitely have it bad as well. And nobody talks about the guards. It's like, so what everyone, not everyone, but a lot of the people say is like, well, don't commit a crime if you don't want to go to jail. And like they say that for guards, it's like, oh, well, pick a different profession if you don't want to deal with that. Like it's just so like promoting of rape culture. It
Yeah.
just blows my mind.
Yeah. It's victim blaming. It's, yeah, it's ignorant. It's just ignorant, right? It's like, definitely these the same people who would make claims like that have never been in a situation um where they were, yeah, they've never been in the situations of people who have ended up incarcerated and imprisoned. Um,
It's mostly men who make that claim, but it's also people of privilege too. It's like they've never been in a homeless shelter
yeah.
or they've you know what I mean? Like Okay, cool. So you don't support women in prison because they may have broke a crime, even though majority of the women that are in prison are in for nonviolent crime that are usually in there because of like poverty and navigating systems of oppression and all sorts of things. Like, what about the women in homeless shelters? What are
There's
you just gonna say, don't be homeless
yeah.
and you won't have to encounter it? Because we have so many cases just in Ontario alone, too, of men who identify as women and go into women's homeless shelters or rape shelters and rape the women.
Yeah.
Like you have like Shane Green from Perry Sound, a convicted pedophile, sex offender who has multiple instances of not being safe in the public, especially around women.
Mhm.
He goes from shelter to shelter and harasses and assaults women and staff.
Yeah.
You also have a case that happened in Windsor where a man identified as a woman and went into the women's shelter and sexually assaulted the woman.
Yeah.
And we have cases going back all the way back to so when they were passing gender identity or expression into the Ontario Human Rights Code back in 2012, um, there was a case of a guy who was going around all the shelters. He even victimized a woman who had, I believe she was blind, either blind or deaf. And they go after vulnerable women because they now have permission from the government to access these places where we have the most vulnerable women and children.
Mhm.
And of course, they're going to do it
Mhm.
because that's what predators and abusive men do.
Mhm.
They access areas where they know that they'll have an easier time to do what they want to do.
And they're being defended. It's not only that they're allowed to do it, but they're actually their rights are being fought for by, and the craziest thing is that most of the time it's women who are fighting for these men.
Yes,
Well, because
it it
because
drives
they're
me crazy.
because they're women, right? It's yeah, it drives me crazy too. It doesn't seem like there's any safe spaces left for women, and it feels like all of our rights are being clawed back while these privileges are being granted to these men, and nobody's thinking about the effect on actually the actual human rights of women and children. um I'm also curious about yeah, the statistics, like crime statistics, when we are when we're taking and recording crime by gender rather than sex. Like, I feel like I'm concerned that now we're starting to see violent crime, sexual crime, pedophilic crimes in women, right, skyrocket because the people who are committing these crimes are like the 99% men, and but they're identifying as women and they're being recorded as women now. So now we're starting to see the stats change, and we're going to have this huge lapse in statistical data going forward. Like 10 years from now, when we look back at the statistical data, what are we going to see? Right. And it's not even going to be reflective of reality.
Well, and also like in Canada, we have like the dangerous offender status, right? The designation. So there's literally like no females who have that status. Like the one right now that does have it is actually one of my really good friends. And it's not because she's a dangerous offender or she's a sexual predator. It's literally because of her institutional behavior. She got pregnant while incarcerated, had like a 3-year sentence, had her baby, and she screwed up and took someone else's medication. And instead of doing a safety plan with her, they took her baby girl away from her. And she snapped. And she ended up doing triple the amount of time and got the dangerous offender status. But most of these men who are identifying as women, they have this status. So it's important to know the crimes that women commit because that's how we do programming. We do security classification, security ratings, like all of those things. Like they are what formulate how we operate the woman's prison, right? So if all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of dangerous offender females and violent females, we're going to change that environment. We're going to change that structure. We're going to change that security. And it's going to end up being a male model again, which they actually moved away from because women's prisons started out with the male model and they found that women did not do well in environments made for men.
Mhm.
And that's why they went with a change. So they're not about equality, they're about equity, right? Like they're
Mhm.
about making it for women, like designed for women. Um, that's why we went from one prison to six prisons so that we weren't like all across Canada away from our families because they found that having family ties and being close to your children and stuff was important. That's why we did the mother-child program because it was important to have to foster that mother-child relationship.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
all those things are going to change when all the statistics are unreadable.
Mhm. Start to reflect more violent crimes, more sexual crimes. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I feel like in terms of like, does C16 need to be reformed, do you think? Repealed, reformed?
Yeah, repealed. I think it does. Yeah.
Do you see in the future, do you ever like do you realistically see that happening?
I think it's going to take a while and it's never going to happen while the liberals are in power. Um, it's unfortunate. Like I feel like I'm politically homeless now in Canada. Like I've always voted NDP.
Yep.
I've always been like center,
Mhm.
and I find myself leaning to the right a lot more because the left is like nuts and there is no center.
Yeah.
Um, but are you in Canada?
Yeah, I'm in Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like nothing positive is going to happen with the liberals. Like Justin Trudeau needs to go. He is ruined this country. And he is he claims to be a feminist, but he's completely anti-woman.
Well,
Um,
this whole it's what's really ironic about this whole movement is that it it claims to be inclusive and representative of all the things, you know, of all progressive, it's kind of like, it kind of crams all the progressive ideology into one and really claims to represent that, but it couldn't be further from an abusive, toxic, it's like the epitome of the patriarchy, right? Like if you're kind of like defining that literally, it is literally the patriarchy taking over. And I agree with you, like in terms of the political homelessness, I've always been a lefty, if you will. I've always been interested in social justice, and to me, this is like an area of social justice that we can't ignore, and that is like essential to shine like all the lights upon. And yeah, and the craziest thing is that when we try to talk about it, we're called fascists and bigots and far right, far right, like wackos. So it's, yeah, but I do agree with you. Like, I know I never ever in a million years thought I would ever even consider voting conservative. But but here we are. Yeah, and yeah, there's lots of stuff happening. So it's interesting because talking about repealing Bill C-16, I feel like that would be, I don't know, that just seems like to see how far, like where we're at now, thinking about repealing Bill C-16 feels really like a big deal, right? Because obviously along with it goes some things that people hold very dear. And I think it would only be advertised or sort of spoken about as like some sort of like backwards, like, yeah, like really right wing, it would be really negatively framed, right? Because, and I wonder if there's something, yeah, else that can happen. Because, like, I just don't know. I guess maybe I don't know enough about C16. Like, I haven't read it it in its entirety, but I feel like men aren't women and they can't like identify that way like legally, because then it changes everything for women, right? And it removes rights from women and children that they need to have intact. It's just crazy. I can't even believe it's like it's happening, but yeah. um
I think what we would see is like with Danielle Smith,
mhm,
with her policies that she's just putting forward. I
mhm.
don't think we would see Bill C-16 repealed, but we would see like changes made, limitations, requirements put in place.
Mhm.
Because right now it's just a free for all, right?
Yeah, what do you think about her policies? Like, what are your thoughts about that begin those first few steps?
Um, so I support her policies. Does she use words that I don't agree with? Yeah, but am I gonna jump on her for using language I wouldn't use
Mhm.
and give her a hard time? No,
what
because
are
it's a
what
stepping
is
stone.
what are the parts that you don't agree with?
Just like transgender female and like,
Yeah.
so she's using like their language, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's a stepping stone. Like we need to start somewhere. And if she would have came out hard-handed, then she's going to have more of a backlash and a harder time trying to change anything.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely work to do on the policy, but I support her and the policy. Um, and the thing that gets me too is like, so she puts like these age limitations in, and like TRAs and experts are always saying, oh, well, you can't get surgery under 18 in Canada anyways. It never happens.
All right.
Then what's the outrage?
Mhm.
What is the outrage? If she specifically says an age and you're trying to say it doesn't happen, then there's no issue there.
There's no issue.
Just like they try to say that schools don't transition your children without parental consent or all this stuff. They say it doesn't happen.
Mhm.
Then what are you angry about?
Mhm.
If it doesn't happen, then just go on with your day. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
But you know it is happening. You know that everything she said is happening.
Yeah.
That's why you're angry.
But we know what's happening. But
Yes,
they're
we do.
not, it's just the CBC isn't running stories on detransitioners or botched surgeries or um kids that have been medicalized at, 12, 13. I think the most recent W path recommendations were like starting kids on puberty blockers at 8 was the like was within their scope of acceptable recommendations, right? Which is just absolutely insane.
And that's going to lower it too, because girls have been reaching puberty earlier and earlier and earlier. Like we weren't getting our periods until we were 12, maybe older, and now these girls are getting their periods at 7 and 8 years old.
Yeah.
And you start developing a year before you get your period,
Yeah.
which means that these 6 year olds and 7 year olds are going to be on puberty blockers to prevent puberty.
Yeah. And I've just recently read a study that revealed like early onset dementia as a result of testosterone, and like because it's fast tracking menopause basically, and then early onset dementia in these young women who are there's just so much there's so many horrific side effects of all of this. It's like it's hard to wrap your head around all of it. And I
They're
am
ruining kids, literally ruining them. Like, I can't even believe that this stuff is going on. It's like, I can't even leave my 9 year old home alone because she's not responsible enough to be left home alone.
yeah,
But you want her to make these decisions that are going to impact her life in major, major, major ways.
yeah, with an expert. Like that's the thing,
Yes.
right? And then it's terrifying because you're like, well, if our experts are saying that this is cool, like like this is even more concerning. It's like it's concerning that people think 9-year-olds should make these decisions, but what's even almost more concerning is that the adults, like I had a conversation recently with like an educational professional regarding some stuff with my kids, and this person said something along the lines of, well, we're all adults and we can have like adult conversations about this. And while I would normally in normal circumstances agree with that, I'm like, unfortunately though, the adults in the room are going along with this and saying this is okay. So um yeah, instead of just telling kids to accept themselves and like teaching kids to love themselves, we're like telling them that, yeah, you're like you can be a different everything. It's crazy. It's really, really,
It all comes down to money, though.
yeah.
A lot of people make a lot of money off of this industry. So they're going to try to support it any way that they possibly can, or else their income goes out the window. Like, I think about this a lot, in regards to many things in society, but like even with alcoholics, right? Being a bartender, you make your money off the backs of sick people. They pay your bills.
Mhm.
And people don't want to think about it in that way, right? Because then they realize how wrong it is.
Yeah. Well, and I'm
Um,
not to like, not to say all bartenders or servers are like drug dealers, but it's kind of like you can really make that correlation of like, we think of drug dealers as like, especially when you're selling to like really, really heavily addicted people, it's like really it's quite an ethical issue. But we can think the same way about bars. It's like you are profiting from sick people, just like you said, right? And it's not a stretch to kind of make that to connect the two, right?
and I am a bartender. I am a server. So
Hmm.
I'm saying this about myself and I see it because I am an addict and I've been through it.
Yeah.
But the problem is the only jobs that I can find are jobs like bartending because of my criminal record and also because I speak out about this stuff. So people aren't going to hire me in a lot of other jobs because I have my criminal record and I also because I'm speaking out about the prison policies. So it definitely puts a lot of X's and boxes on where I can work.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel the same way. I feel like anyone who knows how I feel about stuff, I'm nervous about like my future and stuff, like just thinking about like there was a time when I thought E-Fry would be a cool, like a really empowering and like powerful place to like put my energy at some point in the future when I'm done school and stuff. And and just with like what I've learned, and it's really sad. So it kind of really like I don't know if scary is the word, but it definitely gives anxiety into like, okay, where am I going to be able to put my energy in this world that's going to like that's going to be effective, but that I'm going to be able to actually make a change and that wants me, right?
yeah, I just went through this. I was working as a peer researcher, working on projects at the hospital in Toronto on like assessing mental health, substance abuse, and service disruptions during COVID, and
Mhm.
also on understanding conditions and releases for people with traumatic brain injuries. And I worked there for 2.5 years. Um, and then they let me go because of my association with CAWSBAR and my advocacy about men identifying as women and transferring into women's prisons. Um, so it was like a job right up my alley. Like I have
Yeah.
lived experience in all those categories. Um, like it just,
You're
it was like,
you're a valuable asset to that project, right?
yeah. And it was like, a good job and like I was making $30 an hour and like yeah. And so what they said was it goes against the values of the hospital, specifically inclusivity. And I'm like, isn't it ironic that in order to be inclusive, you have to be exclusive?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yep.
total irony there.
You're excluding people. And then I would also make the opposite argument, like lots of people, like when they try to talk about like that's not inclusive and this and that. And I remember something that Amy Souza said, like, and I kind of take that with me, that like her work around like, you know, boundaries are inherently exclusive. Like we have to be exclusive to protect people. The whole point of having women's prisons segregated from men is to exclude men or to exclude women for the purpose of protecting them, right? Which is like we exclude, yeah, it has to be exclusive, and now we're trying to, it's weird, we're trying to, it's like it's so gaslighty. It's like we're erasing these protective boundaries to, and it's not like it's to protect or to give men access to places they weren't previously allowed to have access to. That's all it is. It's to grant privileges. It's not to grant rights. This is not about human rights. This is not about denying someone's existence. Nobody is denying that someone exists. This is about fighting to stop granting men access to spaces that are supposed to be protecting women and children.
Yeah.
Um, I, yeah. Oh, can we talk about the Reality-Based Women Unite conference that's coming up?
Yes. So that's taking place on International Women's Day in Toronto. So Friday, March 8th. We have a great lineup of speakers. I'm pretty excited about the event.
Too.
So we have like VIP tickets and general admission tickets. VIP will be able to enter at, I believe it's 6, from 6 to 7. So they'll get to meet and greet the speakers. And then the doors open at 7. And then I'm pretty sure speakers start at 7:30.
Awesome.
Um, I'm pretty excited about it. It's CAWSBAR's like first live event. Um, it's been really stressful planning this.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, but it's coming together. Um,
good.
so yeah, we're pretty much like we're like the ticket sales have been great. Like we're almost sold out, which is awesome. So I'm hoping for a great time and hoping that the TRAs aren't totally insane.
Yeah.
But if they are, oh well, we're still
Yeah.
gonna do the event.
You've got like a whole security system set up, and I'm assuming, and everything. It does get
Yeah, we have security and it's private property, so they'll get trespassing warnings, right? And if
right.
they continue to break those, then they'll be arrested and charged. So you want to go to jail? Be my guest.
I really, really hope that it goes smoothly, and that I'm excited for it too. I'm going to be there virtually. Yeah, and who else is speaking with you?
Paradansky, Amy Ham, April Hutchinson, Megan Murphy, Eva. I think you did an interview with her. And then we're gonna have Rain be the host, and Linda's gonna send in a video because she's going to be out of the country,
Right.
which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Well,
But it should,
that's going to be great.
yeah, should be a good time. There'll
Yeah.
be lots to talk about, like sports, prisons, like freedom of speech and expression. Because, like, obviously, Amy is going through with her disciplinary hearing
Yeah.
for nursing.
Mhm.
And then April has also been suspended from the Powerlifting Association for a year because she spoke out about men identifying as women
Mhm.
and being in women's sports.
Yeah.
So,
Are Amy's proceedings still happening? Is that still ongoing right now?
yeah, I think it finishes up in May, or
Okay.
not May, March next
March.
month.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're kind of on the tail end here.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that is March 8th, I believe, for International Women's Day. And
Yeah.
you can get tickets online. As you said, like the in-person tickets are almost sold out, but I'm sure that the virtual tickets are probably endless. So that's amazing. And I just want to reiterate how grateful I am to have you come and join me today and share your story and share your perspectives. Your work is so important. and we know it's important because people are hating on you for it. So that's how we know it's important. Um, I really hope some of these organizations start to like um, consider with a compassionate eye, like women's views, and try to set up some boundaries for women and help platform women again. Because I think that it's really, really hurting women, obviously, what's been happening. And I know it's like a really probably like even for some of the women that you spoke about that you didn't name that, you know, felt this way but still worked for these places and didn't want to risk their careers. I understand it's like a really hard thing. And those of us who like have either chosen to speak or didn't have like necessarily a career that was on the line at the time that we started to talk about it. Um, I get that we're in like different positions, but people shouldn't have to risk or fear losing their careers or their relationships or right for talking
Yeah.
about these issues. So I really appreciate your bravery. It's like amazing. You're a total warrior. And I know I don't know you, but I love you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So your commitment to protecting women is just like, yeah, it's stellar. So that's awesome. And I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, totally. And take care and good luck at the conference.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.